let's start by talking about combustion. Recall that combustion is a reaction that you should be able to write a balanced equation for. So this is combustion of methanol, CH3OH, and we're told that it releases 1150 kilojoules per mole, and that's per mole of the reactant of methanol. So we'll first write this balanced equation and then do some calculations from it. So releasing enthalpy, of course, implies that the system is decreasing in energy, or heat is going to be a product. So methanol is a liquid at room temperature, just like water, and that can combust with excess oxygen. The products of combustion, after you simply spark the methanol, are going to be CO2, which is a gas at room temperature, and water. So we next need to balance the equation. There are